We're now going over to our panel of alumni. So I can see they're all in. I've been keeping an eye on um, the attendees. So I'm really pleased to welcome, we've got Drew, Jasmine, Andrew, Nick and William who are joining us today. So I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves now. And I just want you to tell us obviously what your specialism is, which I've put on screen, but you can share that. And just share a little bit about your career journey so far. So shall we start with Drew?
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me here today. My name is Drew Shaw. So I completed the HSST in genetics. My career journey was I worked in the NHS for 17 years before then leaving on to commercial life in Illumina, where so I've been there for 3 years now. In terms of training, I started off actually as a technologist in genetics. So I worked as a lab technologist for 1 year before then going on to the the clinical scientist training program, which in those days was called the 8th grade training program. In those days in genetics, there's kind of two specialities, so cytogenetics and molecular genetics. So I kind of specialized in cytogenetics, qualified as a clinical scientist, and then kind of later on when HSST was made available, I was kind of part of the very first cohort of HSSTs, which I think was 2014 when it started. So I think maybe some of the issues or problems was because it's so new, there's kind of still a lot of things being put in place in terms of the program. So maybe we can talk about that later. So I think my journey was, I think about 6 years to complete HSST. Kind of starting HSST, I already had my FRC Pass Part 1, but I thought it was a great opportunity to kind of do the Part 2 and also kind of gain the declin sci. So I kind of did all the optional modules to kind of gain FRC Pass and the declin sci as well. So yeah, quite busy time. After finishing my HSST, I started as a senior clinical scientist role, kind of acting as a liaison between kind of technical staff and the scientific staff, as well as kind of line managing one of the teams in the department. And then a year later, I decided it was time for a change, and I kind of joined the commercial world. So I can now work with Illumina. So I'm an associate principal scientist working within a translational research team as well. So kind of applying my kind of clinical knowledge from genetics in a commercial company to kind of advise on how they can kind of better improve their products. So both kind of on market existing products, as also kind of helping to shape kind of new products that are kind of yet to be launched as well. So kind of working internally within R&D teams, but externally within kind of early access customers as well. Yeah, so that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. And if we go over to Jasmine.
Yep, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes. Morning.
Brilliant. Morning. Yeah, so I'm Jasmine Buck. I'm a consultant clinical scientist in microbiology. I work in Surrey for Frimley Health NHS Foundation Trust. So that kind of spans over to acute district general hospitals and the surrounding area. And that's part of a larger pathology network as well, looking after kind of 5 trusts. So it's a hub and spoke kind of pathology setup. Just in case people are coming from a similar area there. I'm very much sort of a national school child, as it were, grown up in the national school. So I came from a PhD background in just kind of biology, cell biology and microbiology, and went straight into the STP program for microbiology in Ashford St Peters. Did my time there, and got a clinical scientist position at Frimley Health. Worked for, I think, just shy of 2 years as a clinical scientist there and the quality officer lead for micro, and then on to the HSST program, which I completed this year, and I've kind of then continued working in the trust, and a lot of my new career as a consultant has been making my job available and then stepping into it. So it's been an interesting career path, and I've been very much I've been the first SDP, the first clinical scientist, the first HSST, and now the first consultant clinical scientist. So probably a lot of a lot of my reflective career thoughts have really been about trying to make a name for yourself in a way, or trying to carve kind of a niche, and making yourself invaluable and proving the point of what our job role is, so that you kind of investing in your own future. And then a large part of what I am sort of focusing on now as a new consultant is actually leading the clinical scientist strategy for the oncoming workforce. So that is about kind of investing back into getting STPs in and clinical scientist roles, and sort of establishing what that looks like as part of our ongoing workforce. Yeah, that's kind of my journey through.
Thank you, Jasmine. You're number one in many ways then.
A guinea pig, for better or for worse. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And over to Andrew.
Thank you, Sally. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Andrew Shah, consultant clinical scientist and head of radiation safety at Barts Health NHS Trust. So I started in cohort 3 in 2016, finished in 2023. So it took me 7 years to do HSST, but during that we had our second child. COVID hit, was managing a team of medical physicists, so lots of other things trying to juggle with HSST at the same time. But managed to get in 2023 both the IAPS completed, first time ranked, which I was happy with, and the DCLIN-SCI submitted and thesis all signed off. So prior to starting HSST, I got into a management role. I kind of climbed through the ranks in radiation safety at Mount Vernon Cancer Centre, got into a management role, and then felt that actually I was really lacking that leadership training, that actually I was an RPA, an MPE, expected to work with consultant doctors at various hospitals, but I hadn't really had any training to prepare me for that aspect of the role. I knew my science well, but actually the leadership side was lacking. And HSST just seemed like an obvious thing to really go for. So things that I've kind of picked up in those 7 years as roles that I was going to probably do anyway, but also thought, you know, this will be great HSST evidence as well, that's led on to further things. I've got a few kind of examples to share. So during HSST, I led on the IPEM workforce survey for diagnostic radiology and radiation protection and physics services. And this has absolutely helped growth in the profession nationally. We've increased the establishment across the country. We've now held our second workforce survey, and the other physics specialisms have started doing similar work. So absolutely, that's helped me carry on having a contribution to my professional body around medical physics workforce. My DCLIN-SCI project was in cardiac CT optimization. So these are CT scans of a patient's heart, trying to look for disease in the coronary arteries. And through that, then I was able to contribute to a regional cardiac CT group for the whole of East of England, and now hoping to do something very similar in London as well. Spin-offs from that project, that was my doctorate. I was invited to be a member of the British Society of Cardiovascular Imaging as their resident physicist, and we are currently working on the UK and Northern Ireland national dose audit for cardiac CT. And looking at the sample size we've got at the moment, I think this could be internationally the biggest dose audit of its kind ever. Looking at previous other international studies, we've recruited so many patients and scanners and hospitals. And this was all a spin-off from my doctorate project, which itself was a spin-off from some optimization work I was just doing as a jobbing Band 8 medical physics expert. Something else that I did during my training was I managed to get involved in the National Imaging Board. So when all the imaging networks and integrated care systems were all being set up about 4 or 5 years ago, we flew the flag with our current now IPEM past president to make sure medical physics was included in those conversations, as there was so much conversation around collaboration and imaging between NHS trusts. And that then led me on to having quite a productive role in some East of England imaging networks. And again, now I've moved to my role in London to keep pushing that around how can we really push imaging services to collaborate and do the best for our patients with that physics input. Probably one of the best things about HSST for all of you thinking about, or all of you starting HSST, is that collaboration and working with my peers in cohort 3. I think we're the best cohort that HSST has ever had, but I'm sure you will all sort of think the same thing as well. I met some fantastic people that I am still really good friends with now, And I know I can pick up the phone to and say, well, this is how we do it at Barts. How do you do it at your hospital? It really breaks down some of those professional silos so that you can share best practice around the country. And then finally, finishing HSST helped me to land what for me was my kind of career dream role, to be a head of radiation safety, a consultant clinical scientist post at a big teaching hospital. So Barts is, I think, the second largest trust in England, and something that really helped me be successful at interview was not the focus on my scientific content and my scientific knowledge, which was kind of a given. It was my leadership approach. How will you lead a team? How will you use that leadership style to influence others, to work closely with clinical services? And I think that's something that HSST and certainly the A modules is really fantastic for. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. And then Nick.
Hello. Everyone's asked this. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Right. Perfect. Hi everyone. Really nice to meet you all. My name's Nick. I'm the head of medical physics for Sunderland South Tyneside Trust. I started in 2010 as a sort of trainee. I think I was one of the last cohorts through the old Part 1, Part 2 clinical scientist scheme. I trained in Cambridge and then moved back to the Northeast in 2013 as a clinical scientist, and then moved on to join as a lead clinical scientist with STSFT in 2016. I started HSST I think I was in cohort 4, so I joined that in 2017 and finished that in about 5.5 to 6 years, sort of in that kind of window. I then I joined as a post as head of nuclear medicine in 2021, moving on to a consultant post in 2022, and then I've started as head of medical physics in 2024. And in that sort of period, I also had 3 kids during. I had no kids when I started HSST, and we had 3 during the time of HSST. Yeah, I think overall I really enjoyed the course, and it certainly is the main reason that I've managed to get to where I am today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That's brilliant. And last but not least, William.
Hi everyone. Can you all hear me?
I can indeed. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So I'll go by Will Brassington rather than William, but William's the formal name. I'm a consultant clinical scientist and head of audiology services at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which covers, my role covers all 4 hospital trusts of University Hospitals Birmingham. I'm kind of slightly maybe unconventional, but maybe similar to some of my kind of predecessors on this call, in that I joined the NHS as a 16-year-old many years ago with just 5 GCSEs, and went through a kind of a program of as a technician, through like a BTEC program, progressed on through like a higher national diploma, and then undertook a master's degree in audiology around 2006, and from there progressed through as a clinical scientist, and then joined onto the cohort 5 of the HSST program in 2018, I believe. So I was slightly unconventional in that I was already a consultant clinical scientist when I joined the HSST program, but I kind of joined that with the intention really of wanting to kind of again further kind of embed some of that knowledge, gain some new skills around research, and gain some further and deeper leadership skills as well. And I'd always had a desire to complete a doctorate program, and I felt that this was a useful way and a reasonable approach to doing so. And it kind of certainly opened my eyes, and it was just when I joined this, I was kind of listening to Lisa talking about some of the ways in which we really need to kind of join with your kind of other HSST colleagues from other disciplines, because I think that is a fantastic opportunity, and there were 50 plus people on our cohort, and I got some really, great engagement with people from scientific disciplines that I never even knew existed. So there are some great opportunities. And I, like other people on this program, took around 6 years to complete the course. We had COVID in the middle of that. I felt like that was quite a long time, but it really does fly by, and it seems like 5 minutes ago that I was joining, like you're joining today. So I'd say really enjoy it and embrace it. So I think what I would say is kind of like, for me, this is about kind of what you've done and what you'll do during the course, and then what you'll do after the course as well. And I think that kind of journey through the HSST program, as to whether you're at the kind of a more senior level already, or whether that's what you're aspiring to be, there's a huge amount that you need to kind of pick up, and you'll be able to use for your things like your endpoint assessment. So there are a number of things that I'd done before the program. I'd led the profession as president of my academy. I'd been a director on the Academy of Healthcare Science. And I was still able to use some of that for part of my kind of IAPS assessment at the end, but just kind of look at how I'd kind of done some of that work and transferred it on beyond there. I think during the program, I led the service through the pandemic, which was a particularly kind of challenging. So for us, our whole service, we're physiological sciences. We deal with ears, not respiratory conditions typically, but we were in one of the, I think what was nationally recognised as probably the most busiest kind of COVID centres. We had 196 patients on ITU at one stage, and that's where we were redeployed to. So we had to kind of change our approach, and I guess take on board a lot of the things that you will learn in terms of leadership approaches and different ways and safe ways of working. But just be innovative, and that's very much what we did. During the HSST program, I kind of led the merger of audiology across like 4 hospitals. I developed my research portfolio and kind of leadership within research as like a principal investigator on a number of studies, and I led things like our organisational audiology / ENT research group, which are all things that were really useful for my kind of development, and were things that I could kind of include in those kind of endpoint assessments as well. I think kind of after, there's a period of, well, you need to take a breath. It is challenging, it's demanding, and I think if you're expecting anything other than that, people will, I'm sure, tell you, well, soon you'll realise that it is a challenge, and I think that you need to rely on all that support that you can, in terms of your supervisors, the universities, and colleagues around you as well, and often family. But I'm still a consultant clinical scientist afterwards. I think I have a different outlook on things. What we're doing at the moment, I'm kind of currently working alongside many other senior scientists within our organisation. We're looking, and we've developed a far more robust healthcare science network across the trust. Some of the work that we're currently doing is we're working with the exec team on looking to introduce an organisational chief scientist for UHB. So that's a particularly kind of important role that's still not recognised, and not embedded across enough trusts. And you would expect that an organisation like UHB with 25,000 plus staff would have a chief scientist, and we don't as yet. So that's something that we're instrumental in working on. I'm still working on publishing my work from my studies, which again, it's one of those things that's fell onto the back burner a little bit, but something I'm keen to do, and it's all in publishable format because of the way that I did my doctorate. I'm supervising and mentoring a number of people through other programs as well, like the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson Leadership Program, which aligns very similar to the A modules and the first 2 years of the HSST. I'm supporting people through HSST and STP equivalents, and I'm involved in some stem cell research looking at regeneration of auditory nerve hair cells for cochlear implant patients. So there's lots of things that are going on that I think that I wasn't involved in before, and that I'm kind of now have something of a different kind of outlook on. But you know, fundamentally, I think, you know, it's been a hugely beneficial program for me, even having spent kind of 25 years prior to this program kind of within the profession. And I know that we all have a kind of a different journey, but you know, that's been the journey for me, which I think has, you know, been supported by this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. That's amazing. And it's interesting to hear a different, you know, different journey in terms of where you started and where you are now. It's amazing. So we're going to go over now to hear some of your questions. So I will just bring up Slido, and some of the questions will come through shortly. So the way we can do it is, if you want to volunteer to answer, then you can just raise your hand or just mention that you want to answer. That's fine. So if you want to ask our panel any questions about, you know, what you've already heard them talk about, you want to hear more about that, or if there's any questions you have around some of any challenges post qualifying, then please ask those now. See if we can get any through. Let's have a look. Oh.
I can't see any questions yet, but I would say to the group, don't be shy. I had loads of questions when I started at HSST. Is this worthwhile? Is it the right career choice to do? I'm an MPE. Does it mean I'm already a consultant? There were so many questions that came up over the years, so I'm sure you've all got lots of them. So yeah, don't be shy.
Yeah, please don't be shy. Okay. Is the FRC path for physiological sciences too? I can see a shake of head from Lisa.
No, it's not. Just life sciences, and all life sciences except for clinical bioinformatics, genomics, because that doesn't sit within the FRC path qualifications, but all other life sciences do.
Thank you, Lisa. Did you have an idea? Oh, where are we? Did you have an idea of what your thesis or research questions were before you started the HSST? So, Andrew.
So no, I didn't. So I started HSST, got a couple of years in, finished the A modules, and then thought, well, what's my project going to be? So I did go around several NHS trusts, spoke to lots of clinical directors, sites where I knew they had interesting imaging technology, to talk about, talk to clinicians with a research interest. I was really passionate about doing something where medical physics and radiologists or cardiologists could work collaboratively, and not that typical silo working that you see in the literature. So I didn't know, and had to go and ask a lot of people, but had support from other senior scientists around me about who to speak to. Yeah, that's my experience.
Thank you, Andrew. Will?
Again, I didn't have a specific idea. I soon developed one. I think what my experience was that when I had a very clear idea and a very clear plan, and to the extent of I'd completed, you know, a very extensive protocol, and then COVID hit, and my study was relying on a commercial company providing me with some equipment to deliver it. And during the period of my I guess delivering that study, unfortunately, there were some major changes within that company, and they actually withdrew from that offer of support. So I did have to kind of go back and revise everything, which was, yeah, it felt like a huge blow at the time. And what I would say is that, often these, our research questions, etc., do get changed quite significantly from what we go into with our original ideas. And I think you can probably expect that to some degree. So if you do need to change it, and sometimes it changes it and doesn't feel like it's changing it for the better, like it's going to perhaps make it somewhat less interesting. But actually, I think that's very much part of it, is that you've often got to expect that what you go in with as an idea, your supervisors will probably direct you to change that in many different ways, and ultimately that will probably be for the benefit of the project.
Thanks, Will. And Drew?
Yeah, similarly, I didn't have an idea what my kind of thesis would be going into the HSST, and also because I think we had the business proposal, which for most people kind of led into the research project. But for me, it actually got rejected. So my C1 proposal for the business case was accepted, but then to convert it into the research project, it was rejected as not being novel enough. So I kind of had to go back to the drawing board and find another project. I'm kind of glad it did, actually, because I ended up doing kind of projects kind of regarding organ transplantation and actually monitoring patients who have organ transplants for organ rejection. So kind of a very different place in terms of what kind of genetics was kind of doing at that point. Rather than doing diagnostics, it kind of then became almost like a routine kind of monitoring test. And actually kind of led to me kind of developing kind of other skills that I wouldn't have kind of developed elsewhere in terms of kind of learning how to code. So some of the kind of methods I did to kind of from published papers or kind of coding in R, and I actually kind of use those skills still these days in terms of some programming and basic command line as well, which actually is kind of a really useful kind of skill to have.
Thank you, Drew. And Jasmine?
Yeah, just to add, because I didn't actually do the full declin side. I did the extended innovation project. So just to give a bit of, that's an okay path as well. And no, I had no idea. I sort of came up with something about a week before you put the proposal in, and that was fine. And I just it was very much a discuss with my supervisor, and we just used it as an opportunity to do something that wasn't very micro based. It was actually more about communication between two different departments. So also just to bear in mind that just because you're doing a very science led or academic route, this is an opportunity to just kind of reach out and do something that you won't have an opportunity to do potentially again or be supported in.
Thank you, Jasmine. So the next question is, consultant posts are still relatively uncommon within physiological science. What advice would you give for establishing a consultant post for the end of HSST? So that is a Will question, definitely. Put you on the spot there, Will, sorry.
No, that's fine. It is a challenge. It's a challenge that we've observed from people that were on my kind of cohort as well. I think in terms of advice, I think that's about kind of, you've got to start as early as possible with identifying what would be the need for this post, and how I guess the introduction of this post is going to impact, and maybe be able to kind of change the process of things and how they're delivered within your specialty in the future. So part of that is going to be about kind of, I guess, the connections and networks that you create. There's going to have to be, I guess, a degree of getting your medical colleagues on board with this. Part of it is, I guess, about trying to understand where are the challenges within the service at the moment. So I think if I was looking at this for a new post, which actually is something that we're doing at the moment, we're looking to say, well, can we create some more consultant clinical scientist posts? Then what we're doing at the moment is we're looking across to our counterparts within ENP, because that's where the medical consultants tend to sit. And we're saying, what is it within their roles that I guess they're not too keen on doing, that where they're overstretched, they're overpressured? What are the national pressures? What's driving the challenges at the moment? So from our perspective, we look at kind of national RTT performance. That's our referral to treatment type performance. we know it's pretty poor nationally within ENT. We know within our organisation at the QE, we are one of the worst national performers around ENT RTT performance. And so we have to kind of look to that and say, well, what is it out of that role that could be done by, a HSST graduate? And how can we effectively kind of sell that then to the organisation that this is an opportunity for us to potentially move some of the funding away from the medical directorate into our kind of scientific kind of budget, really, because that's ultimately what we're talking about. And that's a challenging thing within the current financial climate, of course. But I think that that's a useful place to start. And then I guess if there are any national reports, so for us, that and I think that this is something that's kind of common across most specialties. There's things like the GIRFT report, which is getting it right first time. So there are elements within that report that are relevant to ENT, and they talk about like the pressures on ENT and how things need to be improved. And I think that it's just about exploiting all of those different opportunities. So I think that would be how we would go at it. But the earlier that you do that and get those people on board from your operational managers and your ENT managers, the better, because in my experience, it's going to take a robust business case that will probably take a minimum of 12 to 18 months, if not 2 years plus, to get that pushed through.
Thank you, Will. So this is to all of you to offer a response. Did you experience any problems with managing your existing role around the HSST? That's a big question. Nick.
Hi. I think in general, it is challenging at times to manage your existing role around HSST. I suppose my advice more generally is to try and make sure that any HSST work that you're doing, so whether that's one of your essays or one of the competencies for one file, and this is one thing that I tried to do, which actually really helped, was trying to make sure that any work that I did for HSST was kind of something I needed to do anyway for my actual role. So you weren't sort of having to do. So I basically tried to avoid doing any work that I was only doing because I was on HSST. It was a case of, I'm doing this work anyway, how can I sort of shoehorn it into an HSST competency? And indeed, I sort of did that with the essays. So when I needed to sort of reflect on something that I was doing, I tried to keep it as live and as real and as related to what I'm doing day to day anyway. And so that trying to get that sort of blend, I suppose, between what you're doing in the day job and what HSST requires. And I think, in my view, that was sort of the point of it. Others may differ on that, but that was certainly how I was able to kind of meet that challenge of managing my role around HSST.
Thank you, Nick. And then Andrew?
Echoing what Nick said, it's really hard to juggle everything. What you hopefully agreed with your line manager is that you've got a day a week protected time. So you've got, is it £13,000 a year, some of it for training courses, but for backfill effectively, that try and get your Friday as your HSST day. Don't be tempted to open your emails and start doing day-to-day stuff. Leave that for Monday and really use those days to focus on your assignments, to focus on your doctorate. Don't think, I'll catch up with it next week, because then you start to become further and further behind. So be really particular and make sure the rest of your team know that Friday is not the day to phone you up and say, I've got this problem, it can wait for Monday. So ask someone else in the team. Is really try and protect that time. The other thing as well is have a chat with your other half. That this is a big undertaking for several years, but absolutely is an excellent career development opportunity. And your other half needs to be on board with that as well, to support you when you're writing your assignments late into the evening and the kids need putting to bed. All of that, it's a team effort. It's your team at work, but it's your team at home as well that are going to help you get through this. But if you can keep chipping away at that, if right from day one you keep sticking to that protected time for HSST, you'll get through the work okay.
Thank you, Andrew. And Jasmine?
Yeah, I think some of it's also about being quite strict with yourself and being quite honest with those that you work with. So I very much went from a lab facing role and then was starting to peel off and more into the clinical group. It helped somewhat when my money actually changed. So who was paying me changed, and therefore that gives you a bit of clout to kind of, change your job role. But I think it's just about being quite open and clear with those that you work with so that they have the right expectations. So as you move through the program, you may be dropping things that you did before because your role has changed. So I had to hand over being the quality officer for the laboratory, which is obviously a big ask for someone else. They don't really potentially want to do it. But that's just something that has to happen, and it's about kind of coordinating a good handover so that you're not just sort of dropping things and it's getting lost, which was difficult, and I did not do that perfectly by any means. But so I think, and also on your training plan, you should be incorporating everything that you're doing so that people know the demands on your time. And you can kind of phase things in and just realise that it is progressive. So, when you start HSST day one, you may be doing more of your old work than your HSST. And then as that, climbs and you get more responsibility clinically facing or whatever, discipline you're in, it will obviously be different as well. But yeah, it's kind of a gradual thing.
Thank you, Jasmine. We'll answer the top one really quickly. Can all registered staff mark the one file part of HSST work, or is it just the training officer? I don't know if somebody wants to answer that. It might be Lisa or Owen or Andrew. Fastest finger first.
I'd say be careful. What you want is your evidence that's going on one file is eventually going to go together to build your showcase, where you'll demonstrate the 5 domains of good scientific practice. I have sufficient training to be a consultant clinical scientist because, and you've got to evidence the work that you've put in there. But prior to your IAPs, your assessors might also have a route around what you've got on one file, as well as what you've put forward for your showcase. And they want to see that it's at the right level. And again, this is something that's been a conversation in medical physics, that being a medical physics expert or being a radiation protection advisor, is that enough to say that's consultant level work? And I think we've figured that out now. But early on in HSST, there was some debate around it. So thinking about the work you're putting on there for one file, you'll want someone at the right level to review it, to say, yeah, that's a great consultant scientist piece of work, rather than that's a good scientist piece of work, or a good clinical scientist bit of evidence. Is it a consultant level piece of work? And actually, I'm not sure everyone is capable of assessing that you might have some very, very competent staff, competent in some lab work or some work that you're doing in engineering or physics, but they don't quite get, how do you make it consultant level? So I would just say be a bit mindful of who you're asking to review that work.
Thank you, Andrew. Owen.
Yeah, just thank you, Andrew. I'll endorse everything you said there, just from a technical aspect of things, and this will come out in when you get your one file set up. Your workplace supervisor is registered in one file, and you'll have one workplace supervisor who signs things off in one file. So it is that one individual who signs things off. They may take a steer from other members of staff, but ultimately, as Andrew says, it's their judgment as to whether it's at the right level.
Okay, this is a question that comes up often, actually. How much of a challenge was it adapting to studying the social science aspects of the course? So, when you were writing the essays along those areas. Does anyone want to volunteer? Will?
I think you're right. It is a question that comes up a lot. And I think you can probably all be reassured that you'll all think that this is something of a challenge when you get to do it. And there are some people that already potentially studied some levels of kind of social science, but for most of us, speaking on behalf of my cohort and colleagues that are around me, I think we all kind of went through this journey of almost like somewhat kind of deconstructing yourself, and particularly when you, like me, being in the role and doing things for many years in a particular way, and then all of a sudden you're kind of realizing that there's some level of science behind what you do. And I guess in many ways you will kind of come to the point of like deconstructing yourself and understanding there is something around, there is a science around what you do already. And then part of that is about, in some ways, obviously making that, when you're putting your essays together and writing, I guess, writing in the appropriate academic style. But also part of that is by kind of lived experience as well, and looking at how that kind of links with the evidence that's out there. So I think it's fair to say that probably most people will find that challenging to some degree. But when the more papers that you read, and you'll read the first one and find that it's kind of really quite challenging, and by the time you've read the 10th one, it starts to kind of make a lot more sense.
Thank you, Will. Andrew?
Yeah, I think very similar. I think I found it very kind of mixed in terms of kind of adapting to things that are kind of harder or more difficult, as a scientist, kind of thinking in a very kind of scientific way. And especially kind of some of the topics are kind of quite mixed as well for some of the essays. So kind of maybe more focused on the essay side of things. There were a couple that kind of felt quite abstract, like not relating it to kind of your role or specific, things you do on a day-to-day or projects, but very much talking about more generally about management aspects. And I must admit, I think I had like one of my essays that I did really badly on, just because I didn't kind of enjoy the question, or it was kind of very specific about what you were asked to do in terms of the kind of management question, and it's just so abstract, it just didn't chime with me, and I really struggled to actually kind of put pen to paper for one of them. But I found I did much better on some of the aspects where it's actually practical application, so kind of assessing things that you've done in your department with this kind of leadership or management lens, things like change management, which I did so much better on. It's kind of applying that knowledge rather than just kind of this abstract thinking.
Thank you, Drew. And it's sometimes just rolling with it as well, isn't it? In that case, it's just accepting that might be, some aspects of it are going to feel like that. What are your best tips for managing workload versus personal life demands? Nick?
I'll have to kick this one off. Yeah, I think we sort of touched on this a little bit before, but I think being very rigid, I think with your HSST time, I think being flexible with it a bit as well is definitely helps. When it got to the research project stage of it, I found that rather than doing a day a week, I would do a full week every 5, I think it was, so that basically I would spend a whole week to be able to, because a lot of the time, if you had it only a day a week, you'd take an hour or so to kind of remember where you got to last week with your research project. Whereas I found when I had a week to run at it, it was sort of, you could very much just pause where you were with the project and then pick it up the next day. I also found that, again, I think the course is maybe structured slightly differently to when I did it, but certainly when I did it, all of the modules were face-to-face and in person in Manchester or Liverpool, mostly Manchester, but that meant that I had a sort of 3-hour train ride each way, and then there was usually an overnight stay in the middle, so I tended to try and utilize like every minute of that time that I was out of the house to do things. So I would, write the essays on the train. I would get up super early before the day's lectures, and do a couple of hours of the essay work kind of just in the hotel room and stuff, which then meant that when I got home, I was then around to not write essays and deal with just general home stuff. So yeah, maybe that's helpful, maybe that's not, but that's how I managed it.
Thank you, Nick. And Andrew?
Yeah, this was a real struggle for me and for 2 or 3 staff that I've supervised through HSST. I think being honest with yourself around the time commitment, 1 day a week is not going to be enough at certain points in the 5-year cycle. Year 2 is a really challenging year, when certainly for physics and engineering, when you're finishing off your A modules, you're starting some of the scientific B modules as well. There's a lot of overlap with modules and assignments, and 1 day we won't cut it. But then there'll be periods of the year over the summer where you've got no modules or no assignments to work on. So there will be evenings, there'll be weekends, and I think it's just knowing that up front that there will be challenging times ahead. But on the whole, it will all be worth it in the end. So yeah, I think come into it with your eyes open rather than I can just do it on Friday afternoons every now and then. There's a bit more to do than that.
Thanks, Andrew. And Will? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. I think it's really important as well to recognise for those that are going on to do the full declin sci, the impact of that research study and the amount of time and effort that can take that's kind of, I guess, almost like not visible. So that I think those people that may already have been involved in a fair amount of research will probably be very much aware of this already, but there's a huge amount of like writing research protocols and things like that that almost kind of isn't even kind of marked, but the barriers that can come up within organizations, and certainly the barriers that I experienced within our organization of it taking kind of over 12 months for the organization even to agree to sponsor the patient-led research can really put pressure on people. And my kind of one tip around like research is just allow yourself almost for every week that you expect it to take, or almost allow yourself an extra week on top of that. So when it got to the, and that's maybe a slight exaggeration, but when it got to the point where I felt like it was ready to submit, and I kind of submitted that version to my supervisors, and then they said, actually, well, this is nowhere near ready, and you're going to need to make, even further significant revisions that I felt had been done throughout the period. I think all those things can put a real heavy amount of pressure on people. So those kind of deadlines that you'll be working to within your research, just be prepared that those deadlines may well end up getting pushed back somewhat, because when you go to submit that piece of work, there'll be something that crops up that you weren't anticipating, and I think that's what you've got to be prepared for, and which is possibly the reason that sounds like most of us on this call took longer than the 5 years to actually get to that point of completion of the program, because that final bit is really quite intensive, and there are too many things that kind of pop up in there that you're not anticipating. And that's perhaps something that we wouldn't have time on this call to kind of go through in great detail, but perhaps something that people really need to be talking to their research supervisors in the HEIs and back at base about, because if they've got that experience like a number of us have on this call, that'll be invaluable.
Thank you, Will. That's great. Yeah, some things might be out of your control completely, might they? That's the challenge. I feel like we've answered the one at the top overall, really, unless anyone's got anything to add to it. I'm conscious of the time. We've only got a minute left, but we have got the one that's just come to the top now. I think we've got a bit of time just to answer that, really. So in my specialty, there are very limited CCS posts currently available. I'm excited to get started, but worried this won't translate to a CCS role after. Any advice? So anyone want to offer any advice for that? Jasmine?
Yeah, so I think this is a genuine concern. I think probably everybody on the comment, I mean, maybe if you're already working as a consultant clinical scientist, maybe not so, but even then it's kind of about where you see yourself and what your job role will be after all the training and what you're kind of working towards. For me, so I did have to wait it out a little bit after I completed my training, because I wanted a role where I was. And we did have to sort of fight a bit tooth and nail to get that position in place, because depending on where you are in the country and what discipline you are in, there are various levels of this role being established, and there are pros and cons to that. So I think my advice would be start very early in discussions if you want to stay where you are. you know, have quite open discussions with your training officer and kind of the people with the purse strings, just to see, you know, what is the plan after 5 years? Is there a workforce strategy to, you know, what are they employing you for? Why are they supporting the HSST? Do they have a role for you at the end? And try and get some open answers quite early on, because then you get a bit of a feel about where you might end up. And you know, there are roles across the country, and if you're willing to move and things and look for those positions, then it's about also having a think about what projects and things will make your CV stand out and really give you that edge in getting a future position, maybe in a different trust when you complete. But I think definitely getting in there early, and also when you rotate as part of your training, you may be rotating into other trusts. And it's about also just kind of showcasing the skills of a consultant clinical scientist to them as well, because every interaction you have and every other department that you go to is a potential job opportunity. And certainly I found that afterwards there were, you know, potential locum positions that other trusts would make, that were talking about making, in order to keep me in the network, kind of thing. So it is a little bit about really quite openly selling yourself, really, and just showcasing what the role is, to kind of, because you are an advocate for it as a trainee. And it's partly selfish because you want the job at the end of the day, but it's also about, you know, creating that whole job role across the sort of nationally. So that would be my advice.
Thank you, Jasmine. And finally, Drew.
Yeah, I'll keep this very brief, but yeah, I got a very kind of different view in these. So I found it really hard to kind of get a consultant scientist role. So I did kind of go from a standard clinical scientist to a senior clinical scientist at the end of my HSST, but then just, found it difficult to kind of find my way up kind of through the kind of various kind of levels of senior management. So that's particularly why I left the NHS. It's kind of very hard to do that. So, you know, don't just think kind of the skills you get from HSST give you a great background to kind of going elsewhere as well. So even if you can't find yourself a clinical scientist consultant level role, there are kind of roles, you know, available outside of the NHS as well. Yeah,
thank you, Drew. And Andrew's put a very important point, which Dee did talk about in her introductory talk too, that in the 10-year plan, it's quite significant that there's a significant need for the consultant clinical scientist. So you're in the right position at the moment, coming onto the HSST. So hopefully it's a matter of watch your space, really.